Jerome Hayes, at 39 years old, stood on a $20,000 hand-knotted Persian rug and felt like a ghost. His annual salary, which had peaked at around $72,000 from the auto shop he'd built with his own two hands, wouldn't even cover the cost of the art on the walls of this living room. A single abstract painting, a chaotic splash of blues and grays, had cost his father-in-law $85,000. It was supposed to represent a storm at sea. Jerome thought it represented a Tuesday afternoon oil change gone wrong. Right now, it felt like it represented his life. He was a black man of average height and solid build, his hands calloused from years of wrestling with engines and changing tires. Those hands, usually stained with a fine layer of grease that no amount of industrial soap could fully remove, were now scrubbed raw. He had wanted to look presentable for this conversation. He wore his best clothes, a pair of $120 slacks and a crisp, white $80 dress shirt. Across from him, his wife Keisha and her parents Marcus and Eleanor formed a tribunal. They were seated on a sprawling white leather sofa that probably cost more than his first car, a 1998 Toyota Camry he'd bought for $2,500 and kept running for a decade. Marcus, a man whose deep brown skin was always encased in a suit that cost no less than $3,000, cleared his throat. He wore a $15,000 Rolex President that gleamed under the recessed lighting. "Jerome," he began, his voice smooth and final, like a judge delivering a verdict. "We've been discussing the situation." The situation was the death of his business. Jay's Auto Excellence, his dream, had flatlined 3 weeks ago after a catastrophic loss of its primary commercial contract. The doors were chained, the tools were being liquidated, and his pride was scattered all over the floor of the empty garage in Houston's 3rd Ward. Keisha, stunning in a silk lounge dress that cost a cool $600, stared at a spot on the wall just past his ear. Her long, elegant braids were coiled into a perfect bun at the nape of her neck. She hadn't looked him in the eye for days. Eleanor, her mother, was a study in quiet disapproval, her lips a thin, unmoving line. She wore a simple cashmere sweater that Jerome knew from an accidental glance at a receipt had cost $950. "It's a tragedy what happened to the shop," Marcus continued, the words utterly devoid of tragic feeling. "A real shame, but business is business." He leaned forward, the leather of the sofa sighing under his weight. "The reality is, that business was the connecting tissue of this arrangement. It was your contribution." Jerome felt the air leave his lungs. Arrangement? Contribution? He had thought it was a marriage. He looked at Keisha, a desperate plea in his eyes. She finally met his gaze, but her expression was blank, polished, impenetrable. It was the same look she gave a waiter who brought the wrong appetizer. "What my father is trying to say, Jerome," she said, her voice as cool and crisp as a starched sheet, "is that this isn't working anymore." Then came the final blow, delivered by Marcus with the detached precision of a surgeon. "You're finished, Jerome. The business is gone. Your purpose here is concluded." He gestured vaguely around the opulent room, at the glass walls overlooking a perfectly manicured garden. "This is a certain world, with certain expectations. You no longer meet them." Eleanor added the practical stinger. "We think it's best for everyone if you take your things and go. We'll give you until the end of the week." Take his things. Go. The words echoed in the cavernous space. He thought of his toolbox at the shop, his name engraved on each piece. He thought of the small collection of books in the guest room, the worn photograph of his parents on the nightstand. These were his things. They would fit into the trunk of his 10-year-old sedan. He looked at the 3 of them, their faces calm, resolved. They had discussed this. They had planned this. He was being let go, like a redundant employee. In the home he shared with his wife, he was being laid off. And in that moment of crushing humiliation, standing in the heart of their River Oaks estate, Jerome felt a cold, quiet clarity settle over him. They thought he was finished. They had no idea how wrong they were. What do you do when the people who are supposed to be your family tell you you're worthless? Do you fight? Do you scream? Or do you just nod, say okay, and start planning? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in his shoes. The facade had been beautiful, but it had always felt like a movie set. Jerome remembered the first time he'd had dinner at their River Oaks home, 2 years before the wedding. He'd been so nervous his palms were sweating, and he kept wiping them on his new, slightly too stiff $90 jeans. He'd brought a bottle of wine, a $40 Cabernet Sauvignon he'd agonized over at the store, hoping it was impressive enough. Marcus had glanced at the label, given a tight, dismissive smile, and said, "How nice. We'll save that for the kitchen staff." He then proceeded to open a bottle of French Bordeaux that Jerome later learned cost $800. That night, seated at a dining table made of a single slab of polished mahogany worth at least $30,000, Jerome had felt like an exhibit. Marcus, a real estate mogul who had built his empire on shrewd, often ruthless acquisitions, spoke at length about his latest project, a glass tower in downtown Houston. "The margins are thin, but the prestige is immense," he declared, gesturing with a fork. "It's about legacy." Jerome, whose legacy was built on honest work and fair prices for brake jobs and engine diagnostics, had simply nodded. His own business, Jay's Auto Excellence, was thriving in its own way. He had a loyal customer base in the Third Ward, a neighborhood with a deep, vibrant black culture that felt a world away from the sterile perfection of River Oaks. He had 2 full-time mechanics working for him, and he was clearing a respectable $72,000 a year after expenses. It was a good living, a life he was proud of. "And what about you, Jerome?" Eleanor had asked, her voice dripping with polite condescension. "Still playing with your cars?" "Business is good, Eleanor," Jerome had replied, keeping his voice steady. "We just landed a fleet maintenance contract with a local delivery service. It's a big step for us." Marcus had laughed, a short, barking sound. "Fleet maintenance. Excellent. Every empire needs its stables." Keisha had reached over and squeezed Jerome's hand, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt performative. "Daddy, be nice. Jerome works very hard." She was wearing a simple black dress that day, which he later discovered was a $2,400 Burberry piece. On his wrist, his trusty $89 Timex watch, a gift from his late father, felt heavy and inadequate next to the glitter of their world. The contrast was a constant, unspoken character in their relationship. The disconnect was never clearer than when Keisha visited his shop. She would pull up in her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car that her father had bought her as a welcome to adulthood present when she was 30. She would step out onto the oil-stained concrete in a pair of $1,200 Christian Louboutin heels, picking her way carefully around the tire stacks and tool chests as if navigating a minefield. "Baby, hi," she'd chirp, wrinkling her nose at the familiar, comforting smell of gasoline and coolant. "I brought you lunch." She would present him with a fancy paper bag from a new, trendy cafe, containing something like a $22 quinoa salad with microgreens and a lemon tahini dressing. Jerome, his hands covered in a thick layer of black grease from rebuilding a transmission, would just look at the bag, then at his hands, and smile a tired smile. "Thanks, honey, that looks clean." He knew she meant well, but it was a gesture born of complete non-comprehension. She didn't understand that his lunch was usually a $7 sandwich from the corner store, eaten in 5 minutes while standing over an engine block. She saw his work not as a craft or a passion, but as a dirty, slightly embarrassing hobby that inexplicably paid some of his bills. She loved the idea of him being a self-made man, but she couldn't stand the grit that self-making required. The beginning of the end came disguised as an act of generosity. About a year into their marriage, Jerome hit a rough patch. A new corporate-owned auto chain opened a few miles away, undercutting his prices and luring away some of his less loyal customers. He had a couple of slow months, and cash flow became tight. He mentioned it to Keisha one evening, venting his frustrations as they sat in their minimalist, professionally decorated living room, a room he lived in but had no say in. A week later, Marcus summoned him to his home office, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of leather and money. "Keisha told me you're having some trouble," he said, getting straight to the point. He was behind a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. "We as a family want to help." Jerome felt a surge of gratitude mixed with shame. "Marcus, I appreciate that, but I can handle it. It's just a temporary downturn." "Nonsense," Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Let us invest. We'll create a holding company, JAE Holdings LLC. We'll inject some capital, give you a cushion. It's just a formality to protect our investment. We'll take a 51% stake. You keep 49%. You're still the boss. You still run the show. This just makes it official. It brings you into the family business, so to speak." He presented Jerome with a stack of documents, prepared by his team of a dozen lawyers who billed at $1,200 per hour. Jerome, who had always handled his own simple business filings, felt overwhelmed. He saw words like capital infusion, shareholder agreement, and governance. It looked complicated, official. "Should I have my own lawyer look at this?" Jerome asked tentatively. Marcus chuckled, a deep, patronizing sound. "Jerome, I am your family. My lawyers are the best in the state. Do you think we would do anything to hurt you? This is to help you, to lift you up." Keisha was there too, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, this is a good thing. It means they believe in you. It means we're all in this together." And so, wanting to believe them, wanting to feel like part of the family, Jerome signed. He signed away a majority stake in the business he had bled for, the one tangible thing in the world that was truly his. He thought he was signing a lifeline. He had no idea he was signing its death warrant. The document he signed that day was thick, and in his haste to show gratitude and not appear untrusting, he'd only skimmed the main pages. He didn't read every clause of every addendum. He had no idea what he had just given them. He was about to find out. The betrayal didn't come like a sudden thunderclap. It was a slow, creeping frost that started at the edges of their life and moved inward. It began the day the email arrived from A1 Couriers, his biggest client. For 3 years, Jerome had serviced their entire fleet of 22 vans. The contract represented nearly 40% of his revenue. The email was short, brutally corporate. "Dear vendor, please be advised that as of November 1st, A1 Couriers will be terminating our maintenance agreement. We have decided to move in a different direction. We thank you for your service." Jerome felt the blood drain from his face. He immediately called his contact, a guy named Dave he'd always had a good relationship with. Dave was evasive. "Sorry, Jerome. It came from the top. My hands are tied." The top was a man named Mr. Peterson, the owner of A1. Jerome had met him once. He was a gruff, old money type who, Jerome now recalled with a sickening lurch, played golf with Marcus every Thursday at the River Oaks Country Club. He drove home that evening in a daze, the world outside his windshield blurry and unreal. He walked into the house, a sprawling 7,000-square-foot monument to modern architecture that had never once felt like his home. Keisha was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, a glass of chilled white wine in her hand. "Keisha," he said, his voice hoarse, "I lost the A1 contract." She looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed not with concern but with annoyance at the interruption. "Oh, that's a shame." She took a sip of her wine. Well, what are you going to do now? There was no, what are we going to do? There was no comforting touch, no shared sense of crisis. There was only him, alone with his failure, and her, an observer waiting to see how he would fix it. In that moment, the frost reached his heart. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was in this alone. A few days later, the other shoe dropped. With the A1 contract gone, the shop's finances became untenable. The overhead on the large garage, the salaries for his 2 mechanics, he couldn't cover it. He spent 2 weeks trying to secure a bridge loan, calling in favors, trying to find new clients. But the hole was too big. With a heavy heart, he had to tell his guys, 2 good men with families, that he couldn't make payroll. He had to close the doors. That was the day Marcus and Eleanor appeared at the house, unannounced. They sat him down in the vast living room, the same spot where he would be formally exiled just a few weeks later. This was the preliminary hearing. Marcus, dressed in a casual but still obscenely expensive $800 cashmere polo shirt, adopted a somber tone that was completely unconvincing. "Jerome, we've heard the news. We're so sorry." He didn't look sorry. He looked like a predator who had just cornered his prey. "I've spoken with the accountants for the holding company. Given the dissolution of the primary asset, the shop, we're going to have to unwind the LLC." Jerome just stared at him, numb. "This arrangement," Marcus continued, steepling his fingers, "is no longer viable. The business was the connecting tissue. Without it, there's no foundation." It was the exact same speech he would give later, a rehearsed, soulless script. Eleanor, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Keisha has a certain standard of living, Jerome, a certain world she belongs in. We have to be practical." Jerome finally found his voice. He looked past them, at his wife, who was standing by the window, her back to him, looking out at the perfectly landscaped garden. "Keisha, are you hearing this? This is our life they're talking about." She turned, and her face was a mask of cold resignation. "They're right, Jerome. I can't do this. The struggle, the uncertainty, it's not who I am. The struggle." He had worked 60-hour weeks for 5 years to build that business. He had poured his sweat and his savings into it. He had done it for them, for her, to prove he was worthy of her world. And now that it was gone, she was telling him that his effort, his fight, was an inconvenience she was unwilling to endure. The ultimate humiliation came a week later. Months before, Keisha had bought a table for a $1,000 a plate charity gala for the Houston Children's Foundation. It was a major social event for their circle. Jerome, now effectively unemployed and on the verge of being homeless, begged her not to go. "Keisha, please. It doesn't feel right. I have nothing to wear, nothing to say to these people." "Don't be ridiculous," she'd scoffed. "We have to show our faces. What will people think if we don't show up?" So he went. He put on his one good suit, a simple black number that had cost $400 5 years ago. He felt like an imposter, a pauper, at the prince's ball. Keisha, on the other hand, was radiant in a new $8,700 Armani gown, her neck glittering with a diamond necklace her mother had loaned her for the evening. Throughout the night, he was a ghost at her side. When old acquaintances of her parents would ask him, "And what do you do, Jerome?" he would open his mouth to answer, but Keisha would always jump in first. "Jerome is exploring some new ventures," she'd say with a bright, false smile, or, "He's in a transitional period." It was a verbal erasure. He wasn't a mechanic. He wasn't a business owner. He was a project, a problem, a man between opportunities. The lowest point of the evening came when he saw Marcus leading a man over to Keisha. The man was tall, handsome, and radiated the easy confidence of old money. Jerome recognized him as James Worthington, a high-powered attorney and one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Marcus made the introduction, pointedly ignoring Jerome, who stood just 5 feet away. "James, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Keisha. Keisha, James is a partner at Vincent & Elkins." Keisha laughed, a light, tinkling sound that Jerome had once loved. "A pleasure to meet you, James." She didn't even glance in Jerome's direction. He wasn't just being replaced. He was being forced to watch the casting for his replacement. He slipped away from the table, walking out onto a balcony overlooking the city skyline. The glass towers of downtown Houston, the very symbols of the power and wealth Marcus worshipped, seemed to mock him. He felt a profound and suffocating loneliness. They hadn't just decided he wasn't good enough. They were making sure the entire world knew it. He stood there for a long time, the cool night air doing nothing to quell the fire of shame and a new hardening anger in his chest. They had made a critical mistake. They thought that by taking his business, they had taken his power. They had no idea what was coming. Saturday, October 12th, 3:15 p.m. The air in the guest room of the River Oaks mansion was thick and still, heavy with the cloying scent of Eleanor's favorite $120 Joe Malone lime basil and mandarin diffusers. For Jerome, it was the smell of defeat. He was surrounded by cardboard boxes, a landscape of brown against the room's pristine beige walls. This room, with its ensuite bathroom and walk-in closet, was larger than the first apartment he'd ever rented. For the past 2 weeks, it had been his prison cell. He was supposed to be packing his personal belongings, the meager collection of items that defined his existence outside of this opulent cage. But instead of sorting through his worn paperbacks and old t-shirts, he found himself drawn to 3 boxes he'd hastily retrieved from the office of his now-defunct shop. They were labeled JAE, Corporate Docs, followed by the year. He knew he should just throw them out, let the past burn. But some instinct, some nagging feeling of an untied loose end, made him open the one marked 2022. He sat on the floor, the plush, cream-colored carpet a stark contrast to the gritty concrete floor he was used to. He sifted through invoices, old tax filings, vendor agreements. It was a paper graveyard, a testament to a dream that had died. His fingers, clean for the first time in years, felt foreign as they flipped through the files. Then he saw it. Tucked at the very bottom, beneath a thick stack of quarterly tax returns, was a slim, dark blue folder. It was a high-quality folder, the kind lawyers use. Not the flimsy manila ones he bought in packs of 10 from Office Depot for $8.99. The label on the tab, printed in a crisp, sharp font, read, JAE Holdings, LLC, Contingency Agreement. He didn't remember this folder. He didn't remember this title. With a growing sense of unease, he opened it. Inside was a single document 10 pages long, bound by 2 heavy-duty staples. The title at the top sent a jolt through him. Contingency Buyout Agreement. His heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. He started reading. The legalese was dense, a thicket of jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. But he forced himself to go word by word, his finger tracing the lines of text. He scanned past the boilerplate about share valuations and governance structures, his eyes searching for the meat of it. He found it on page 4, under a section heading titled Clause 7, Conditions of Dissolution. The language was brutally clear. In the event of the voluntary or involuntary dissolution of the primary business asset, defined herein as J's Auto Excellence, or in the case of declared insolvency, the 49% share held by Jerome Hayes shall be considered null and void. He felt a wave of nausea. This was it. This was the fine print that stripped him of everything. He had signed this. How could he have been so stupid? But he kept reading. The next paragraph was the one that changed everything. Upon said dissolution, it continued, and contingent upon the majority shareholders, defined herein as the Marcus Thorne Family Trust, providing formal written notice for the minority shareholder, Jerome Hayes, to vacate the shared residence located at 214 Oakmont Drive, a one-time contingency payout will be executed. The sum of this payout is fixed at $310,000, to be disbursed from the JAE Holdings LLC escrow account number 744-891B at Sterling Commerce Bank. Jerome read the paragraph again and again. His mind reeled. A $310,000 payout. It wasn't a punishment clause. It was an exit clause. A golden parachute he never knew he had. They weren't just kicking him out. They were buying him out. They had put a price on his silence, on his clean disappearance. But the most damning part, the detail that turned his shock into a cold, hard rage, was at the very end of the document. He flipped to the last page. There were the signatures, his own, a hurried, trusting scrawl, and Marcus's, a confident, arrogant flourish. And next to them, the notary's stamp. He squinted, reading the date embossed in the paper. September 5th, 2022. September 5th. His blood ran cold. The email from A1 Couriers, the one that had started the death spiral of his business, had arrived on September 28th. This document, this meticulous plan to buy him out and erase him, had been signed and notarized a full 23 days before the event that they all claimed was an unfortunate, unforeseen tragedy. It wasn't a tragedy. It was an assassination. He leaned back against the wall, the document trembling in his hands. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus playing golf with the owner of A1 Couriers, the investment that gave them majority control, the carefully worded contract he had been too trusting to read, the immediate cold dismissal the moment the shop failed. It was all a script, written and rehearsed months in advance. They didn't just abandon him when he fell. They had pushed him. He looked around the perfect, silent room. The expensive diffuser, the silk curtains, the abstract art down the hall. It was all bought with a kind of wealth he'd never understood. A wealth built not on hard work, but on clever clauses and ruthless moves. They had played a game he didn't even know he was in, and they had made one single, critical mistake. They put the rules in writing, and they had just handed him the rule book. A switch flipped inside Jerome. The grief that had been a heavy shroud over him for weeks evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold, crystalline focus. The humiliation, the shame, it all burned away, leaving behind the hard, unbendable steel of purpose. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist. He folded the document carefully, slipped it back into the dark blue folder, and placed the folder inside his worn leather briefcase, a $150 gift from his parents when he first opened the shop. It was the only thing of real value he now possessed. The first rule of his new game was simple. Act the part they've cast for you. He had to be the broken man. That evening he came downstairs for dinner. He hadn't eaten with them in days, preferring to take a tray to his room like a sullen teenager. His appearance in the dining room was a surprise. "Jerome," Eleanor said, a hint of alarm in her voice. "We weren't expecting you." "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. He had deliberately not had anything to drink for hours to make it sound that way. He looked down at his feet. I wanted to apologize." He looked up and saw Marcus and Keisha exchange a quick, triumphant glance. It was exactly what they wanted to hear. "Apologize for what?" Marcus asked, feigning magnanimity. "For everything," Jerome said, letting his shoulders slump. "For failing. For letting you all down. For not being enough." He let the last words hang in the air, a perfect imitation of a defeated man's confession. "You were right to invest in me, and I blew it. I'm sorry." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension eased, replaced by a comfortable, condescending pity. This was a narrative they understood. The humble, failed man, acknowledging the superiority of his betters. Marcus placed his linen napkin on the table and stood up. He walked over to Jerome and put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "It takes a big man to admit that, son. We appreciate it." The son was a final dismissive pat on the head. "Don't you worry, you'll land on your feet, just not here." "I know," Jerome said, meeting his gaze. He held it for just a second, a flicker of the truth passing between them, before he looked away, back at the floor. "I'll be out of your hair soon. I'm almost done packing." Keisha, who had been watching the exchange with a detached sort of relief, finally spoke to him directly. "Do you need any boxes? I think we have some in the garage from the last time the decorators came." "No, thank you," Jerome said softly. "I don't have much to take." The lie was a masterpiece of misdirection. He was playing the part so well they were already forgetting he existed. They saw a man packing up old clothes and worn-out shoes. They had no idea he was packing a bomb. His next move was to confirm the trigger. The contract was clear. The payout was contingent on a formal, written notice to vacate. Their arrogance demanded a clean, legal severing. They wouldn't just throw him out. They would have him served. He needed to be sure. The next afternoon, he was walking past Keisha's home office, a small, sunlit room where she managed her lifestyle blog, which mostly consisted of posting photos of expensive things. The door was ajar. He heard her on the phone with her mother. He stopped, flattening himself against the wall, holding his breath. "He's being so pathetic, Mom, it's almost sad," Keisha was saying, her voice a mix of boredom and contempt. "He actually apologized to Dad last night. Can you believe it? The groveling?" There was a pause as Eleanor presumably said something on the other end. I know, Keisha continued. "It's for the best. Dad's lawyer is drawing up the official eviction notice now. He said it's better to have it all documented, no loose ends. It'll be served on Friday. Once that's done, the last tie is officially cut. We can finally move on." Jerome's heart gave a single, hard thump. There it is. The eviction notice. Friday. The final piece of the puzzle. He backed away from the door silently, his movements fluid and noiseless. He felt a grim satisfaction. They were walking right into the trap they had set for him. His final performance was on Thursday evening, the night before the notice was to be served. He was taping up his last box in the guest room. Keisha appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, a glass of wine in her hand. She was watching him like a zoo patron observes an animal about to be transported to another facility. "Are you really taking that old lamp?" she asked, gesturing with her glass toward a worn, brass table lamp with a slightly crooked shade. It had belonged to his mother. It was one of the few things he had of hers. Jerome didn't look at her. He just kept taping the box. "Yes? It's so dated. It doesn't match anything." "It's not supposed to match anything," he said quietly. He finished with the box, labeled it Fragile Memories, and placed it by the door with the others. He turned to her, his face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. "I'll have a friend pick these up tomorrow afternoon. I'll be gone before you get back from your lunch." She nodded, satisfied. "Okay. Well, good luck, Jerome." It was the kind of thing you say to a stranger. He just nodded. He was playing dumb, but he had never felt smarter in his life. He was a mechanic, a man who understood how engines worked. You had to know the system, find the weakness, and apply pressure at exactly the right point. He now knew the system. He had found the weakness. And tomorrow morning, he was going to apply the pressure. The first call Jerome made was not to a friend for a couch to sleep on, but to a name he'd gotten from a fellow small business owner a year prior, Anita Vance. She was a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman in her late 40s, whose reputation was built on fighting for the underdog against corporate giants. Her office wasn't in a gleaming glass tower downtown. It was on the second floor of a modest, well-kept brick building in Midtown, a space that signaled competence over flash. Her hourly rate was $450, a fortune to Jerome, but he knew this was not a time to cut corners. He sat across from her at a simple, uncluttered desk, the dark blue folder lying between them. The morning light streamed through the large window, illuminating the faint dust motes dancing in the air. Anita, her hair in neat, elegant twists, listened intently as Jerome recounted the entire story, from the initial investment to the overheard phone call. He spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the facts without emotion. When he finished, he pushed the folder across the desk. "This is the agreement they had me sign." Anita opened it and began to read. She was a fast reader, her eyes scanning the pages with practiced efficiency. Jerome watched her expression. It remained neutral for the first 3 pages. But when she got to page 4, clause 7, he saw her eyebrows shoot up. She read the paragraph about the $310,000 payout, then read it again, more slowly this time. She flipped to the last page and studied the signatures and the notarized date. A slow smile spread across her face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just spotted a fatal flaw in her quarry's defense. "Mr. Hayes," she said, finally looking up at him. Her voice was low and charged with energy. "This isn't just a contract. This is a work of art. It's a meticulously planned corporate execution." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against the document. Marcus Thorne is known for being clever. He's also known for being arrogant, and his arrogance just handed you a winning lottery ticket. "What do you mean?" Jerome asked. "He tried to be too clever," Anita explained. "He could have just strong-armed you, relied on his power and your lack of resources. But men like Marcus need to feel like they've won legally, cleanly. They need a paper trail that justifies their actions. So he created this document, a way to legally sever you from the family and the business, all wrapped up in a neat little bow." She pointed to the key phrase with her pen, "contingent upon formal, written notice to vacate." This is his mistake. He made his own vindictiveness the legal trigger for your payout. He could have written this a dozen other ways. He could have tied it to the date of insolvency or made it discretionary, but he didn't. He tied it to the act of him, personally, having you served with an eviction notice. He wanted the satisfaction of that final, formal rejection, and that satisfaction is going to cost him $310,000. Jerome felt a weight lift from his chest. "So what do we do?" Anita's smile widened. "We do nothing. We wait. You said they're having the notice served on Friday?" Jerome nodded. "That's what I heard Keisha say." "Excellent," she said. "Here is the plan. You will arrange to be at a specific location on Friday morning. The notice will be delivered to you there. You will sign for it. The moment you do, you will send me a photograph of the signed receipt. I will have a demand letter and an execution order prepared, citing this clause and addressed to the legal department of Sterling Commerce Bank. The moment I receive your text, I will file it." She explained that because the money was in a designated escrow account tied to the LLC and the contract was ironclad, the bank's legal obligation was to the terms of the agreement, not to Marcus Thorne. They would have no choice but to comply. "It will be a swift, non-negotiable transfer," she said. "He won't even have time to call his lawyers to try and stop it. By the time he understands what's happened, the money will be in your account." Jerome felt a surge of adrenaline. "My account? I don't have an account they don't know about." "You will," Anita said, already pulling up a form on her computer. "We're going to open a new one this afternoon at a different bank. You will be the only signatory." They spent the next hour meticulously planning the logistics. Jerome would have the notice sent to his friend Andre's apartment in the 3rd Ward. Anita drafted the demand letter, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She compiled a package for the bank that included the full buyout agreement, a copy of Jerome's ID, and the new account information. Everything was staged, ready to be deployed. As he left her office, Jerome felt like a new man. The fog of despair had been replaced by the sharp, clear lines of a battle plan. He was a mechanic again, but this time he wasn't fixing a car. He was dismantling an engine of cruelty and greed, using the manufacturer's own faulty specs to do it. Friday, October 18th, the day of the strike. A cool autumn rain was falling over Houston, streaking the windows of Andre's small but clean 2nd-floor apartment in the 3rd Ward. The weather felt appropriate, a cleansing. Jerome had been up since 5 a.m., unable to sleep, a coiled spring of nervous energy. He sat at Andre's small kitchen table, a mug of black coffee untouched in front of him. His phone was on the table, screen up. Andre, a true friend, had taken the day off work to be there, providing quiet, solid support. At exactly 9:17 a.m., there was a sharp rap on the door. Jerome's head snapped up. This was it. Andre opened the door to reveal a young man in a rain-slicked uniform holding a clipboard and a large, legal-sized envelope. "Package for Jerome Hayes," the courier said. "That's me," Jerome said, his voice steady as he walked to the door. He took the clipboard. On it was a delivery confirmation slip. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "From Thorne and Associates Legal Services." He looked at the envelope. It was thick, official. He took a deep breath and signed his name on the digital screen with the attached stylus. The courier handed him the envelope and left. Time, 9:18 a.m. Jerome closed the door and leaned against it for a second. He held up the envelope. It was done. "Trigger pulled," Andre said, a grim smile on his face. Jerome didn't waste a second. He placed the envelope on the table, took out his phone, and snapped a clear picture of the signed confirmation receipt on the courier's device, which had emailed him a copy. He opened his text thread with Anita Vance. He attached the photo and typed a single word, "Go." Time, 9:19 a.m. Miles away, in her Midtown office, Anita's computer pinged. She saw the text and the image. She immediately picked up her desk phone and hit a speed dial number. "Cynthia, it's live. File the Sterling package now." In the next room, her paralegal, who had the entire package pre-staged, hit send on a secure email to the legal compliance department at Sterling Commerce Bank. Simultaneously, she sent a fax and dispatched a physical copy via a rush messenger service. The multi-pronged attack was designed to create an undeniable and instantly verifiable record. Meanwhile, another part of the plan was unfolding in River Oaks. At 9:25 a.m., a different kind of courier, a professional process server hired by Anita, walked up the stone pathway to Marcus Thorne's mansion. He rang the bell. Marcus himself answered, dressed in a $1,200 monogrammed silk robe holding a copy of the Wall Street Journal. He was sipping from a delicate porcelain coffee cup. "Yes?" Marcus asked, his tone dripping with annoyance at the interruption. "Marcus Thorne?" the server asked. "I am." "You've been served," the man said, handing him a crisp envelope and walking away without another word. Marcus stared at the envelope confused. He thought it must be related to one of his business deals. He tore it open. Inside was a single-page document. It was a formal notice of contractual execution. He read the first line, "Pursuant to Clause 7 of the JAE Holdings LLC Contingency Buyout Agreement, dated September 5th, 2022, triggered by the formal notice to vacate served upon Mr. Jerome Hayes on October 18th, 2022, at 9:18 a.m., we hereby demand the immediate and full disbursement of the stipulated contingency sum of $310,000. Marcus's face went white. The color drained from his luminous brown skin, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray. The Wall Street Journal slipped from his grasp, scattering on the marble floor. The porcelain coffee cup dropped from his other hand and shattered, splashing dark liquid across his expensive robe. He didn't even notice. He staggered back into the foyer, rereading the document, his mind refusing to process it. Clause 7? Buyout? $310,000? It was a ghost from a past he thought he had buried. A clever little clause he had designed to be a final insult. A way to put a price on Jerome's removal. He had never, in his wildest dreams, imagined it would be used against him. His first instinct was panic. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling so badly he could barely unlock it. He dialed his personal banker at Sterling. "Get me David Chen," he barked into the phone. When the banker came on the line, Marcus's voice was a panicked hiss. "David, there's an execution order against the JAE escrow account. You have to stop it. It's a mistake. It's fraudulent." There was a pause on the other end. Then the banker's calm, corporate voice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. It's already been processed by legal. The documentation is ironclad. The funds have been transferred." "Transferred where?" Marcus roared. "To a new account in the beneficiary's name per the instructions." The transfer was completed at 10:27 a.m. Marcus hung up. A strangled cry of rage and disbelief caught in his throat. He immediately dialed his daughter. Keisha was at a high-end yoga studio in the Galleria, finishing a class. Her phone buzzed in her locker. She saw Daddy on the screen and rolled her eyes, letting it go to voicemail. He called again and again. On the fourth call, she answered with an exasperated sigh. "Dad, I'm in the middle of a vinyasa flow. What is so important?" "The money, Keisha." Marcus's voice was a raw shriek of fury. "The contingency fund. He took it. The grease monkey took the money." Back in the Third Ward apartment, Jerome's phone began to light up. A call from Marcus Thorne. He ignored it. A voicemail notification popped up. Then another call from Keisha. He ignored that too. Voicemail. Then a text from Marcus. "You have no idea what you've done. Call me now." Jerome took a slow sip of his now cold coffee. He opened his banking app. He logged into the new account he had opened 2 days before. The previous balance had been $100, the minimum to open it. Now it read, available balance, $310,100. He looked at the number, then looked out the window at the rain. It was washing the city clean. Andre clapped him on the shoulder. "Man, I've never seen anything like it." Jerome finally allowed himself a small, tired smile. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was the storm. And the storm had just made landfall. He then listened to the voicemails one by one. The first was Marcus, sputtering with rage. The second was Keisha, confused and angry. "Jerome, what is going on? My father is losing his mind. You need to call me back right now and fix this." Fix this. As if he had spilled something on her rug. It was perfect. The consequences of that single, perfectly executed maneuver cascaded through the Thorne family's world like a wrecking ball through a house of cards. The downfall was not just financial. It was social, professional, and deeply personal. Each loss was a direct result of their own arrogance. First, the money. The $310,000 was not, as Jerome had once imagined, a drop in the ocean of their wealth. As it turned out, Marcus Thorne's empire was more leveraged than it appeared. That specific sum was earmarked as a critical down payment for a new commercial real estate venture in the Heights, a trendy, rapidly developing neighborhood. Marcus was under contract to purchase a plot of land for $1.5 million, and the $310,000 was part of the non-refundable deposit due the following Monday. With the funds gone, he scrambled to move money around, but the liquidity wasn't there. He missed the deadline. The deal collapsed. He not only lost the opportunity, but was also forced to forfeit a previous $50,000 good faith deposit he had already paid. His attempt to save face by ousting Jerome had cost him a total of $360,000 in immediate, tangible losses, plus the immeasurable loss of the future project's potential profit. Next came the social implosion. River Oaks runs on two currencies, money and reputation. Marcus had lost a significant amount of the former and was about to lose all of the latter. Men like Marcus don't get outsmarted, they do the outsmarting. The story, however, was too delicious to stay secret. It started with a leak from a clerk at the bank, who told his cousin, who played tennis with the wife of one of Marcus's business rivals. Within a week, the entire saga was the talk of the River Oaks Country Club. The narrative was brutal and humiliating. Marcus Thorne, the master negotiator, had been financially gutted by his own son-in-law, the humble mechanic everyone had dismissed, using a contract that Marcus himself had written. He wasn't seen as a victim, he was seen as a fool. His rivals delighted in it. At the club's bar, they would toast him from across the room with mocking smiles. The respect he had commanded for decades evaporated, replaced by whispers and quiet laughter. He had built his identity on being the smartest man in the room, and Jerome had proven he wasn't even the smartest man in his own family. For Keisha, the fallout was just as devastating. Her life was a carefully curated performance of effortless wealth and social standing. That performance was now a farce. The story painted her as not just cruel, but stupid. She had stood by and watched her husband be systematically dismantled, only to be caught in the blast herself. The handsome, high-powered lawyer, James Worthington, that her father had been grooming as her next match, called her once, not to ask her out, but to politely and definitively withdraw from their social circle. "My firm is very sensitive to public perception," he'd said coolly. "This situation is untenable." He didn't want the drama, nor did he want to be associated with a family that had been so publicly and thoroughly humbled. Her friends, most of whom were as transactional as she was, scattered. Some offered syrupy, insincere condolences while secretly relishing her downfall. Others simply stopped returning her calls, distancing themselves from the stench of social failure. She was no longer an aspirational figure. She was a cautionary tale. Her lifestyle blog, once a stream of glossy photos from galas and resort vacations, went silent. What was there to post? The canceled trip to Aspen? The returned $8,700 Armani gown she could no longer afford to keep? Even Eleanor was not immune. To cover the immediate financial hemorrhaging, the lost deposit, the lawyers they had to hire to see if there was any way to fight the contract, there wasn't. She was forced to do the unthinkable. She had to quietly sell off some of her prized assets. The first to go was a stunning emerald-cut diamond bracelet, a piece she wore to every major social function. It sold to a private dealer for $45,000, a fraction of its insured value because she needed the cash quickly and quietly. The absence of the bracelet from her wrist at the next charity luncheon was a silent, screaming admission of their diminished status. The divorce was the final, mercifully swift act. With the contract executed and the money transferred, there was nothing left to connect Jerome and Keisha. He filed for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. They didn't fight it. Their legal team, already bruised and battered, advised them to settle quickly and quietly. The marriage was dissolved in less than 90 days. Jerome asked for nothing. Not a piece of furniture, not a dollar of spousal support. He wanted only one thing, his freedom. And he had already bought and paid for it with their money. He walked away with his dignity, his integrity, and $310,000. They were left with the ruins of their reputation and the bitter taste of their own medicine. 1 year later, the Houston sun, bright and unfiltered, streamed through the large, clean bay doors of a modest garage. The sign above the doors was simple, painted in a bold, clean font. Hayes Authentic Auto. The building wasn't huge, but it was pristine, and most importantly, Jerome owned it. He had used a third of the payout for a down payment, securing a mortgage for a small commercial property in a quiet, up-and-coming neighborhood just outside the 3rd Ward. There were no partners, no investors, and definitely no holding companies. Every wrench, every lift, every brick in the wall was his. Jerome, now 40, was sliding out from under a 2018 Honda Civic, a satisfied grunt escaping his lips as he wiped a smear of grease from his cheek with the back of his hand. He was leaner, the stress of the past few years replaced by the satisfying exhaustion of honest work. He was making less than he had at the peak of his old business, but his peace of mind was priceless. His $95 Timex Expedition, a slight upgrade from his last one, felt just right on his wrist. On his desk, in a clean, simple silver frame, was not a document or an award, but a faded photograph of his parents. They were standing in front of their own small home, arms around each other, smiling. They were hard-working people who had taught him the value of integrity and a job well done. He felt for the first time in a long time that he was truly honoring their legacy. The small bell on the office door tinkled. A woman with luminous, deep brown skin and a cascade of beautiful locks entered, carrying a Tupperware container. This was Imani, a second-grade teacher at the local elementary school. They had met 6 months ago when her car broke down just a block away. Jerome had fixed it for the cost of the parts, and she had insisted on repaying him with a home-cooked meal. They had been having meals together ever since. "Brought you some of that gumbo you like," she said, her smile warm and genuine. She set the container on his desk, unfazed by the clutter of invoices and parts catalogs. "Don't work too late." "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, his own smile coming easily. She didn't see a grease monkey or a failed businessman. She saw a man who was good with his hands and good in his heart. She loved the smell of his shop. She said it smelled like competence. Their life was simple. They went for walks in the park, cooked dinner together in his small apartment above the shop, and talked for hours about books and dreams and the funny things her students said. It was a love built not on assets and appearances, but on shared values and mutual respect. It was real. As Jerome was closing up the shop that evening, a sleek white BMW pulled up to the curb. It was a newer model, but he recognized the driver instantly. Keisha. She got out of the car. She looked different, thinner, and the expensive clothes she wore seemed to hang on her with a certain desperation. The confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle facade. She walked to the entrance of the bay, stopping at the edge of the clean concrete. Jerome. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Keisha." "Your shop. It's nice," she said, the compliment sounding hollow. "I heard you were doing well." "I'm doing okay," he replied. There was a long, awkward silence. Then she took a breath. I came to say I'm sorry for everything. We were wrong. I was wrong." Jerome listened, his face betraying no emotion. He thought of all the pain, the humiliation, the cold, calculated cruelty. Forgiveness, he had learned, wasn't about absolving the other person. It was about freeing yourself from the weight of their actions. "I appreciate you saying that," he said finally, his voice calm and even. "I wish you peace, Keisha." It was a dismissal, gentle but absolute. He wasn't offering reconciliation or a path back into his life. He was closing the book. She seemed to understand. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and for the first time he thought he saw a flicker of genuine remorse. She turned and got back in her expensive car, a cage of her own making, and drove away. Jerome watched her go, then turned off the last light in the bay. He locked the door to his shop, the solid click of the deadbolt a satisfying final sound. He was a man who had lost a business but found his worth. He had been cast out of a palace, but had built his own kingdom, however small. In the end, true wealth isn't found in glass towers or on the pages of a bank statement. It's not about the price tag on your clothes or the car you drive. True wealth is the peace you feel at the end of a long day's work. It's owning your own labor, your own space, your own soul. It's building a life of authenticity, one honest bolt at a time, a life so solid that no one can ever take it away from you again. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride. If Jerome's story of quiet strength and earned justice resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of resilience and hope. We all face moments where we feel underestimated. Remember, your worth is not defined by others, but by your own integrity and the good you put into the world.